Swamp Watch is straight ahead. On our last show, we asked what you wanted us to profile on Swamp Watch, and a huge number of you said healthcare and pharmaceuticals. Whether it's the problems caused by Obamacare or the issues the Republicans have had trying to replace it, the real reason we're in this mess on healthcare is because it costs too much. And the reason for that is because both parties are in the pockets of big businesses that make money by pushing up costs. It's the health swamp. The pharmaceutical companies, the hospitals and clinics, and the insurance companies. So we wanted to spend the next few weeks showing you what's really going on with our country's healthcare system. Tonight we'll start with the pharmaceutical companies.
They're getting away with murder. Pharma has a lot of lobbies, a lot of lobbyists, and a lot of power.
That was then candidate Donald Trump on the pharmaceutical industry's enormous influence and the swamp it's created at the expense of your health. 70% of Americans take prescription drugs, more than any other country, and it costs us more too. This chart shows that Americans pay over $1,000 a year on pharmaceuticals, way more than every other OECD country. Denmark's citizens, for example, spend $240 a year on medications, and many of those drugs are developed and produced right here in the US. But all the money we spend doesn't lead to better health. In fact, our health is worse. We're 26th in the world for life expectancy, tied with Chile. But who could possibly benefit from us spending more on drugs but not getting any healthier as a result? The pharmaceutical companies, whose main incentive is to sell as many drugs as possible. And they have a whole medicine cabinet of swampy ways to do it. We talk a lot about revolving doors in Swamp Watch, and the pharmaceutical industry is no different. The Food and Drug Administration is the regulatory agency that decides which drugs make it to market. Researchers charted the careers of people reviewing certain medications at the FDA. They found that 60% of those reviewers who left the FDA went on to work for the biopharmaceutical industry. According to the lead researcher, if you know in the back of your mind that your career goal may be to someday work on the other side of the table, I wonder whether that changes the way you regulate. Yeah, I wonder. But perhaps the most blatant example of the health swamp revolving door is former Louisiana Congressman Billy Tauzin. From 2001 to 2004, he chaired the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which oversees the FDA. During that time, drug companies and health insurance companies contributed nearly $1 million to his campaigns. Tauzin was instrumental in pushing the Medicare Modernization Act of 2003 through the House. By doing so, he ensured that Medicare cannot negotiate with drug manufacturers for lower prices. He also made sure that drugs manufactured here and exported to Canada can't be imported back into the US, just in case they drive prices down and actually help American consumers. And then, after years of pushing big pharma-friendly legislation, what did Billy Tauzin do next? He left Congress to run the industry's powerful trade group, the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, or Pharma, a job for which he was paid $2 million a year. This is the reality of the swamp. We all pay more, while an elite few get rich. Of course, it's just as bad on the Democrat side of the aisle. Senator Max Baucus was the man in charge of the Obamacare legislation. But guess who's been described as, quote, more personally responsible than anyone for the drafting of what became Obamacare? Someone you really should know about. Elizabeth Fowler. She was vice president for public policy at WellPoint, then America's second largest private insurance company. Who better to become Max Baucus's chief health counsel? How convenient for the health swamp to have one of their own people writing the Obamacare legislation for them. And how convenient for Elizabeth Fowler that after Obamacare passed, she landed a job as head of global health policy at Johnson & Johnson, one of the chief beneficiaries of President Obama's signature legislation. These big pharma companies have deep pockets. In 2016, the industry spent a massive $246 million on lobbying. But the abuse of power doesn't stop there. Big Pharma has even corrupted clinical trials. Clinical trials are supposed to be an objective scientific way of showing that new medicines are safe and effective, except they're not objective. It turns out many are ghost-written by the pharmaceutical industry. They carry out their own tests on their own drugs and then publish them under the names of top researchers in medical journals, researchers who had nothing to do with the trials. A study by Transparency International said this is done to, quote, increase the prestige and reputation of the findings, while simultaneously researchers are able to improve their reputation, which can lead to promotions. These shady clinical trials are a complete fraud. One industry-funded trial claimed that a particular antidepressant produced 94% positive results. A later test by the FDA found only 51% positive results. Drug companies have also started paying doctors to participate in surveys of medicines that they never even prescribed. In fact, they spent $42 billion a year just on targeting doctors. Remember that when you see your doctor. On average, they are paid $61,000 a year by the pharmaceutical industry to push particular drugs, whether they work or not, whether you need them or not. The swamp extends to the official guidelines for prescribing drugs too. Statins are the drugs used to treat high cholesterol. 8 out of 9 doctors who wrote the recent national cholesterol guidelines received money from statin manufacturers. The psychiatrist responsible for overdiagnosing children with ADHD received $1.6 million from the manufacturers of the drugs used to treat it. The whole thing stinks. But perhaps none of this swampy behavior is as disgraceful as the pharmaceutical industry's role in the opioid epidemic, which killed 52,000 Americans last year. A health crisis so bad it's actually started driving US life expectancy down. For most of the last century, the terrible addiction that opioids can cause meant that they were shunned as a treatment for pain. But that all changed in the 1990s, with a large-scale lobbying and public relations effort to make opioids acceptable. Part of it was run by a non-profit, the American Pain Foundation. Sounds nice, right? A non-profit focused on reducing pain. Except that the organization was basically a front for Big Pharma. It received 90% of its funding from medical companies. Some of their board members have extensive financial ties to drug makers, and the group lobbies against limits on opioid use. The most commercially successful of the new opioids is OxyContin. It was released in 1996 by Purdue Pharma with a promise that the drug could be prescribed with less risk of abuse and addiction. Well, that turned out to be a lie. In 2007, Purdue Pharma paid $600 million in fines, and 3 executives pled guilty to felony misbranding over OxyContin. But don't feel too sorry for them. Purdue Pharma is owned by the Sackler family. In 2015, with the opioid epidemic that they helped cause raging through our country, guess where they suddenly popped up? Number 16 on Forbes magazine's list of richest American families. I hope they enjoy their $14 billion fortune. The health swamp is like no other. It is literally killing people while enriching those who play the game.